talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console. I think you all know I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games. Which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize them. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in,
Eles
we
falaram
know
que
it's probably
eles colocaram
impossible, but
SSD
can you put
porque
an
era o
SSD in?
próximo passo e que é o
That
que
was
eles
the
mais
discussion we
pediam,
were also having
que era o
internally.
SSD.
It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same
Oi!
time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already
Eu
banging up
sei!
against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible.
Nossa.
If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50%
É
more
bem
data on the
técnico.
disc and
Eles são
50% higher
super
effective
técnicos.
read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My
Pra quem
rule
não
of
sabe,
thumb is
tá?
that the
O
hard drive is
SSD você não
spending
precisa
2/3 of its
desfragmentar
time
ele
seeking,
porque
and only
parte
a
da
third of its
funcionalidade
time
dele é
actually
arranjar
loading data.
perfeitamente toda a informação que
Putting all of
entra
that
nele.
together, a
É
gigabyte
uma
is
das
very
coisas que
roughly
faz ele ser
20
mais
seconds
rápido
to
também.
load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change?
Meu
Now,
Deus.
SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't
5
have seeks as
gigas
such. If you have
por
a 5
segundo.
gigabyte a second SSD,
Esse
you can read data from
é a
1,000
ideia dos
different
caras
locations
com
in that
o
second,
PlayStation
pretty much at speed.
5.
As for
5 gigas
time
por
to
segundo.
load a
5,
gigabyte,
5.
this is next gen we're
5
talking
gigas
about,
por
so
segundo.
memory is
Para
bigger.
você ter uma
Instead,
noção,
we should be
você
asking
precisa de
how
um
long to
PC
load
em
2
média,
gigabytes.
tá?
And the answer
Com
is
uma
about
placa
a
de vídeo
quarter
de
of a second.
280
I mean, that's amazing. We're talking
e
2 orders of
SSD
magnitude, meaning
potente.
very
Bom,
roughly 100 times faster.
nossa.
Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the
0,27
SSD,
segundos.
the
Menos de
potential is that
segundo,
the game boots in a second.
2 gigas.
There are no
Meu
load
Deus.
screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures
Isso aí
and
que ele está
models to fill
mostrando
memory.
é uma
Which you
base
can do as long as you
de
have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the
conceito.
old assets and then
Aí ele
take
está
30
falando
seconds or
que
so
para
to load the
carregar
new assets.
você
Having a
precisaria carregar
30-second
tudo
elevator
isso.
ride is
E o
a little extreme.
desenvolvedor
More
tem que
realistically,
meio que
we'd probably
maquiar
chop the
para
world
poder
into
conseguir
a
rodar
number
isso
of smaller
rapidamente nos
pieces and
consoles
then do some
atuais.
calculations with
No
sight
SSD,
lines and run speeds
isso
like we
resolve.
did for
Isso
Haven
funciona.
City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked
Basicamente, o que ele
about
falou é o
the
seguinte:
dream of an
eles
SSD, part of the
colocam
reason for that
vários
5 gigabyte per second target was to eliminate
sub-encaixes
loads, but also
para
part of the
conseguir
reason for that
carregando
target was
e aí
streaming.
o cara carrega uma
As
área,
in,
o personagem
What
tem que
if the
passar tudo aquilo
SSD is so
enquanto
fast
carrega a
that as
próxima
the
área.
player is turning
Porque
around,
senão.
it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can
A
load.
gente tá
That
vendo,
sounds about
e
right
o que
for
não tá
next gen.
vendo, conforme vai virando, vai carregando.
Back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But
Você tá
there's a
falando sobre
downside too,
carregar
which
várias
is that
sessões ao
frequently
mesmo
used
tempo,
data is included in many
né?
chunks and
Por
therefore is
exemplo,
on the hard
jogos de
drive
Battle
many,
Royale,
many
eles têm um
times.
processamento ruim,
Marvel's
porque
Spider-Man
ele
uses
não
this
se
strategy,
adapta
and though it works
ao
very well for
processamento
increasing
atual,
the streaming
né?
speed,
Ele,
there's a
mesmo no computador,
massive
você vê que ele
duplication
não
as a result.
consegue rodar
Some of the objects
perfeitamente,
like
né? Teria que
mailboxes
ser
or news racks are
computador
on the hard
focado
drive
nisso.
400 times.
E a base do
What I'm
PS5
describing
é
here are
justamente
things
se
that
adaptar para ele
cramp a
conseguir
creative
gerar várias
director's
coisas.
style.
Por
Either
exemplo, você
level
olhar ao
design gets a little
distante,
bit boring in
muito
places,
longe, e vai
or
estar
the data
carregado
is
lá.
duplicated so
Porque
many times that
você
it no
vai
longer
ter a
fits on the
capacidade de
Blu-ray
carregar
disc.
múltiplos locais
And
ao
you end
mesmo
up with
tempo.
hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch.
Aí tá falando
That's
sobre
because when
quando
just part
copia o
of a
arquivo.
file has been changed, the new data
Quem
can be
tem
downloaded
alguns
pretty
jogos
quickly.
sabe que para
But
copiar o
before the
arquivo
game
para o
boots up,
console
a brand
demora
new file has to be
demais,
constructed that
demais
includes
mesmo.
the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated.
Isso é muito
Which
importante.
means no installs as you know them today.
Você, quando ele petear
There's
o seu
yet
jogo,
one
além de
more
baixar
benefit, which is that
rapidamente,
system
ele
memory
vai
can be
também
used much more efficiently.
já jogar rapidamente no
On
local.
PlayStation
Então,
4,
copiando
game
que hoje
data on the
demora
hard
cerca de
drive
20
feels very
minutos, dependendo
distant
do
and
jogo, do
difficult to
tamanho,
use.
vai
By the
demorar
time
em
you
torno de
realize you
a
need a
2
piece
no
of data,
máximo.
it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That
8
means a
GB
lot of the 8
de
gigabytes of system memory is
DDR5,
idle.
G
It's just
porque é a
waiting
versão
there
da RAM,
to
tá?
be
A versão de
potentially
console
used.
ela é G.
On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like
Nossa,
more
vai mudar
RAM.
para 16,
Typically,
é
it's
muito
fast
mais.
enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used.
Ele está falando
A
que não
different way
precisa
of
das
saying that
partículas
is
que
that
tem
most of
atualmente
RAM is working
para rodar
on the
o
game's
jogo
behalf.
direto do
This is one of
HDR.
the reasons that 16
Então ele roda
gigabytes of
zerado.
GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second. No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away. The reality,
Basicamente,
though,
no
is that the
PS5,
SSD is just
nós
one piece of the
teremos
puzzle. There's
os
a lot
mundos
of places
mundo
where
aberto
bottlenecks can occur in
muito
between the SSD
mais
and the game code that
agradável
uses the
e
data.
viável para
You
ser
can see this on
produzido. É
PlayStation
isso que
4.
ele está
If I
falando.
use an SSD
Isso
with
é bom,
10
isso é
times the
muito bom.
speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed. And there are a lot of them. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final
Vô, eu
location.
tô trabalhando,
At
vô.
the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part,
Já,
moving
já
the
tá
data, meaning
lavando.
copying it from one location
Eu
to
sei, mas
another,
ainda falta
takes
centrifugar.
roughly an
Eu tô
entire
trabalhando primeiro, depois
next-gen
eu vou lá ver
CPU
isso.
core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all
Eu
the
sei, vô,
overheads
mas
get
eu tô
100 times
trabalhando
larger,
agora.
that will cripple